get this one rolling, I'm excited to say that I have two very big announcements for Silvercore Club members. The first one is time sensitive, and there's only 4 spots available. Skeena Spey Lodge on the fabulous Skeena River in Terrace, British Columbia is offering Silvercore Club members 40% off July 29th to August 2nd. I'm going to be up there, my wife Tiffany's going to be up there. We'd love to catch up on the river or in the lodge with any Silvercore Club members that want to go and experience some world-class fishing. The second one is Keith's Titanium. I've been testing out and using their gear for some time now. You've seen me using it on social media and on YouTube, and it is quality kit. Silvercore Club members get 20% off Keith's Titanium. Just go to the Silvercore website, log into the club member portal, and there will be instructions on how you can redeem your 20% off Keith's Titanium. Remember, these are only open to Silvercore Club members. Not a Silvercore Club member? Go to silvercore.ca/club. You can learn all about how to join. I would highly, highly recommend it. Now, today's episode is about suppressors, or silencers, or sound moderators, or cans, or whatever you want to use to term the devices that you put on the end of a muzzle that reduces the decibel level. In Canada, these devices were named as prohibited many years ago for reasons we'll talk about in this episode. If this conversation resonates with you, if suppressors are something that you would like to see legalized, we're going to have to elevate the conversation past the podcast level up to the regulatory level. And this is where I'm going to lean on you for your help. Share this episode on Instagram, on Facebook, on all other social media platforms. Tag your friends in it. Tag other groups that you think could help propel the conversation forward. Tag Silvercore and myself, and we'll repost as well. If we want to have some common sense rules and regulations surrounding these important safety devices, we have to start having a conversation about it based in fact and reality. Now, without further ado, let's get on with this episode. I'm joined today by someone pushing the boundaries of what suppressors can do and how we think about them. In the United States, he's helped turn these tools from misunderstood and restricted to common sense safety devices. If Canada's going to have that conversation, it starts with understanding what we're missing. Welcome to the Silvercore Podcast, Kyle Grob.
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, Kyle. I'm doing good. I'm glad we're able to make this thing happen. So
Yeah, for sure.
So KGM, I take it that's going to be your initials.
Yeah, it's originally was Kyle Grob made. Back in previous life, when I started the company, I was building race cars. So it was all fabrication and machining and stuff like that. So that's where it came from.
Okay, so you went from a market that's way less restricted and high dollar value, and you decided to get into developing, manufacturing suppressors?
I just went completely in the other direction, yes.
How's that treating you?
It's fine, man. Cannot complain.
Good. Okay, well,
Yeah,
I figured, I'm looking at some of the chatter that's happening in the United States about suppressors, or people call them silencers. Actually, I think it was Hiram Maxim that coined the term silencer, wasn't it? Back in the day with his, he came up, and which is really a misnomer.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make them silent. Like if you're getting
No.
20 to 35 decibel reduction on a firearm, you're doing pretty darn good.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, tell me. I want to learn about suppressors. I've got a little bit of background. I've played around with commercial suppressors. I've developed and made suppressors here in Canada under strict rules and business licenses, and under my own business license and under other business licenses. And I have no business in making suppressors, really. It was look at a design and try and copy it, and it was more an exercise of learning the old Colchester lathe and single point threading and putting these things together. But it was an interesting experience. I want to know more from a professional about what they're all about, why they're so evil, and why that perception's changing. Like in Europe and in certain states, there seems to be a change towards occupational health and safety and looking at the legitimate benefits for not losing your hearing.
Yeah. So probably the best way is to go backwards a little bit and kind of, why did suppressors go from, Hiram Maxim's patent, where it was a nuisance kind of reduction device, was, for, hunting or plinking or stuff like that, to all of a sudden it's one of the most highly restricted items in the U.S., and that's the NFA Act. So if you go back in time, really what a lot of the NFA was to try to catch gangsters. So your Al Capones, they were trying to catch machine guns, short barrel rifles, and at the very last minute, suppressors were added to just try to, give a fell swoop of being able to create a felony pathway so that, essentially they could arrest gangsters. So, it was $200. So your house cost what, $1,000 back then. So a $200 tax stamp was extremely expensive. So they thought that let's just make it so obscenely expensive that no one's ever going to get it. Okay, cool. It's not going to be a problem. Well, fast forward almost 100 years, 90 years. And, it's one of those, the health and safety side has become really the forefront. So you mentioned Europe. So in Europe, they're not regulated per se like they would in the U.S. Now, they're regulated like a firearm in Europe. Now, it is a lot harder to get a firearm in Europe, but suppressors are treated as an off-the-shelf kind of item. And there's actually a lot of areas in Europe that you can be fined for not hunting with a suppressor.
Right.
So it's a very, very different mentality.
I remember I was 19, 20 years old, and I was touring around through Europe doing the backpacking thing, and I came across a farm, and I could see there's a little bit of a home-built cover where the guy had specifically made for shooting, and he had shooting his rifle, plinking away, and he had a suppressor on it. And I said, holy crow, that's neat. I walked into his farm, totally not allowed to, but I figured, I don't know, what's he going to say as I leave? And anyways, he was more than happy to show me what he was doing. And he says, I have to have a suppressor here. Because I was telling him, Canada, we can't have them. They're looked at as completely prohibited, illegal, evil. He says, no, I got to. I'm within a certain proximity of my neighbor, and noise pollution bylaws dictate that I have to use this. I thought, that's really interesting. And it's a bit of a different approach. And when I look at, so the NFA, National Firearms Act, that was back to like 1934, right? And that was targeting Capone and the gangsters and everything else. Yeah. My understanding of it always was that they threw suppressors on, not so much as a gangster thing, because there was no evidence to say gangsters are using suppressors and bad guys are using them, but because they thought they would make for an effective poaching tool, and they wanted to be able to curb poaching because people were hungry and they're trying to get food. So I think they put short barrel shotguns in there and suppressors and a few other devices. And they're like, we'll just throw all of this stuff in together under a little bit different guise. But if we're going to make laws, let's just, in for a penny, in for a pound, throw it all in. And then Canada looks and says, Canada's even lazier about it. And it says, what they did. We're just going to do what they did. And there was no logic behind it. There is no, it was no crime-based statistics that would support it. And today it absolutely wouldn't hold up, because our legislation, it doesn't say you pay a tax stamp and you can get it. It just outright prohibits it. There's no path towards ownership. It doesn't give a decibel reduction level. So anything that's intended or designed to muffle or silence the sound of the report of a firearm. So that's pretty broad and open, and it makes intent specifically an intent-based crime. I would say it would have a real snowball's chance in hell of passing today. I don't know why people aren't looking at it in Canada, but people are looking at it in the States, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of stuff's changing here in the States. Again, a lot of stuff's moving around health and safety, especially on the military side. Military and law enforcement is really pushing it. I think DOD put out last year a report about large caliber, so your 338s, your 50s, stuff like that, mortars, any kind of large cannon fire about TBI and the causes of TBI and relating directly to munitions and armament and stuff like that. So you're really seeing a shift of, oh, it's not this movie quiet, or we're not trying to, prevent gangsters and this and like that. You're not seeing that anymore. You're seeing a lot more, this is an actual health and safety thing. So interesting statistic that I've heard from multiple different sheriff's office is essentially a officer involved shooting. So a single shot from a 16-inch AR, permanent hearing damage. So you look at it from the insurance side of things, of now that officer is on disability for the rest of his life, probably is going to require hearing aids or some point in his life. You look at the cost benefit of, you could have outfitted the entire agency for what the insurance and or the agency is going to pay for that one officer for that one time.
And that's just one.
And
you start
that's just one.
that.
And then imagine if you multiplied that across the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps or any like that, or the several 100,000 cops that are in the U.S. So, even from the health and safety side, it just gets the numbers get insane so quickly about how much impact you can actually have just by having suppressors. And then you look at, the hunting side of being able to hunt, more and more urban areas is, encroaching on farmland or hunting land. And so what if you could, turn the sound down a little bit and be able to, like a European kind of mindset where, hey, they still want to be able to hunt, but if you're 2 miles or 3 miles from a subdivision, it's going to be really hard to. So I think the mentality is really changing. Again, the whole silent thing. The only thing that's even close to that is Suppress 22, if you've ever shot that. Super, super quiet, and that's it. But, supersonic bullet crack is still in the 120s. So you're never going to get about like that. ARs and other semi-auto rifles, have a certain amount of ejection noise or cycling noise. There's only going to be so quiet you can get a supersonic projectile. So they're not the movie Hollywood quiet that everyone thought they were for so many years. And that's what a lot of U.S. politics kind of hung their hat on, of like, oh, it's silencers. Oh, you're going to be able to stealth. They're only made for assassins. You only need a silencer if you're going to go out and hunt people. Right. And it's just the furthest thing from the truth. So there's been a lot of legislature that's really evolved, I'd say even the last 20 years. And then suppressor ownership has grown even the last 5 years. I mean, it is not doubling every year, but I think there was over 800,000 suppressors registered last year.
Wow.
So the numbers just keep growing every single year. And then there's a bill attached to the most recent funding bill, the Big Beautiful Bill, I think is what it's called.
That's right.
There's HPA, which is Hearing Protection Act. Now, it's evolved a little bit over the years, but essentially it would allow suppressors to move from a class 3 kind of NFA item down to what's called a Title I or GCA. So it would go on a 4473. So a over-the-counter, still the same background check, still the same kind of scrutiny with a weapon, but it's not all the extra fingerprints and all the extra stuff and you have to go through. So if that passes, that is an absolute game changer for the industry as a whole.
And they would also remove that $200 tax stamp on it as well, wouldn't it?
It would. Right. It would. Yes, it would.
So that's next step, I guess, is Senate consideration. And if it passes signed, it'll completely deregulate suppressors in the United States federally.
Yep. Federally. Now, it's still going to be state regulated because there's still 7 states, I think, 7 or 8 states that do not allow them at the state level. So your California, your Illinois, Massachusetts, New York. Yeah, I know. So you're still going to have a states' rights kind of thing, and they're still going to be regulated at a state level. But the federal deregulation will really, really push things along and put pressure on the states, I think, to go, well, if it's federally deregulated, why are you doing it at a state level kind of thing?
Have you heard of? I was doing a little bit of research. I'm not up on politics generally, but American politics. But the Shush Act. Have you heard of that one?
Yep. So Shush Act is around short barrel rifles.
Is that what it is?
Short barrel shotguns, I think. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, I thought it would remove suppressors from both the NFA, the GCA, and it would bar state level taxes and registrations and simplify transfers. I thought that was a part of the shush, but maybe I'm.
Um, I might be mistaken, but I thought it got pulled out. HPA got rewritten, and then that one was more focused around the SBR SBSs.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's something we can have in Canada. It's funny, everyone looks at the United States and they say, oh, you guys can have everything. Canada, we can have nothing. Well, it depends on what state you live in, number one, because Canada, it's all federal. It doesn't matter what province you live in, it's going to have the same rules, more or less, unless it comes down to like transport kind of rules and carry permits. Those geographical extent is looked at provincially. But, it doesn't matter where you look. We all got our goofy rules that are rooted more in emotion than it ever seems to be rooted in some sort of common sense, pragmatic approach that's backed up by, I don't know, stats, some figures and science.
Common sense is not common, so.
Yeah, isn't that Mark Twain's one of his quotes there, Samuel Clemens? I agree 1,000%. Common sense is not that common. So, all right, for people listening to this, for a suppressor to work, because you can go on YouTube and you can see people building suppressors from pop bottles, from oil cans. Sorry, I'm going to put my air brackets. You can get your oil can solvent catchers, so you can thread
solvent trap.
Solvent trap. That's what it is. A solvent trap.
Yeah.
And they work for a few shots. They're not crazy good. They're not crazy accurate, but for noise attenuation, they'll work a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit about the science behind noise suppression on a firearm?
Yeah, so I guess I'll back up a little bit of why we got into suppressors. So my background's mechanical engineering. I grew up a shooter, long range, like more precision bench rest shooting, a lot of sporting clays, and a little bit of like 1911 and handgun stuff growing up. So I grew up reloading, grew up shooting my whole life. And so really it came down to, in our machine shop, one of my employees had a couple suppressors. And I was like, hey, let's go try these. I've heard about them for years, but I've always had issues with accuracy with them. And so we took them out and put them on, pretty dialed in rifle that I had. And it took, an absolute, tack driving rifle and made it into it took a sub quarter minute rifle and made it about a minute and a half.
Oh,
and I was
wow.
like, okay, there's a problem here. Like what's going on? So I go back from the mechanical engineering, fluid dynamics, fluid mechanics of how gas and how essentially energy flows through a system. And you looked at a lot of the suppressors on the market, and it was, the conventional cone baffle with a clipped cone. And I looked like, hey, this is causing high pressure over here, low pressure over here. I know that that's probably not good for projectile stability. And, and I asked him, I was like, hey, do you see a lot of POI shift? Do you see a lot of accuracy consistency? He's like, yeah, it's just part of suppressed shooting. Now, I know that's not every can. It may be just the ones we were shooting, but it became kind of an engineering exercise of, hey, how do we treat gas flowing through a cylinder, an object differently? And that's really what drove us into it, was like looking at it from a very data-driven, kind of very fluid mechanics-based approach. And that's where some of our patents have come from. That's where a lot of our technology has come from is, number one is accuracy. If we everything we do is accuracy is our number one kind of a bullet point. And if it's not accurate as a gun or more, makes the gun more accurate, we start over. And that's just something we do. And, so the whole goal around what we do on the suppression side is, accuracy and consistency and, alignment. We do, post-secondary, EDM to keep the bores perfectly straight. There's just a lot of things that go into, how we build cans and how we do stuff that more centers around accuracy and then gas flow. On the like gas gun side. So very, very high flow. That's where the health and safety side comes in to this is, how do you not have a super high back pressure suppressor that still performs well on the sound level?
So you say EDM? That's what electrostatic discharge machine. That's that little zap 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 in the kerosene bath. It gives ultra
Uh,
precise.
well, well, yeah, we actually do it in water.
Okay,
So our
deionized water.
EDM it's wire EDM. It's in deionized water. We essentially sand the suppressor up vertically, how it would mount to the weapon system, and we essentially undersize the bore a little bit when we make it. And so we laser weld everything. There's a couple different ways you can build suppressors. We do high volume production, so we laser weld everything. We undersize the bore, and we come in and essentially clean it up. So it is perfectly true to how it would mount on the weapon system. Again,
Oh
chasing
wow.
accuracy, chasing tents, all that kind of stuff like that. Yes.
Oh, that's light years above what I was doing. That's yeah. I would find like I first started. I was like, what do I look at? How do I learn about this stuff? Well, there's this Paladin Press, and they've got all these like how to build backyard suppressors. I'm like, all
Yeah.
right, I'll start learning a little bit. You got to have wipes, they say. So as the bullet goes through, it goes through all these wipes. You got to have. They're using that copper curly Q scrub pad stuff for heat dissipation, and the more I learned, and then Ellen Paulson wrote a couple of books on kind of the Bibles back in the day. Anyways, there's probably other stuff now on history and design
Yep.
of suppressors, and so started reading through that and learning. Okay, wipes, they're not the ticket. That curly Q stuff, you don't necessarily need it. The material that you make it out of makes a difference, right? If it's
It does.
different materials will absorb heat faster, which can heat up a lot faster, but it can be quieter for a bit, less durable. So we started playing with blast plates. I was kind of all over the board with it, but I never got to a point where I ever understood fluid dynamics. Everything was trial by error. and um, how do you judge fluid dynamics on a suppressor? How is that done?
So we start out again chasing. We do a lot of caliber specific things. So we have a 22. So we have suppressors from 22 to belted 50. So M2 suppressors. So we have a wide gamut of product that we build, and we really do chase a lot more application specific stuff. So we don't build a lot of generic kind of do all cans. And there's a lot of companies that do that, and there's a lot of good successful product out there that does that. That's just not really our niche. That's not really kind of what we chase. We chase very data driven, very specific application stuff. So, if I'm going for, hey, I want to build a 6.5 can. Okay, well, what's my gamut of 6.5 calibers? You go down all the way from 6.5 Grendel all the way up to, your Creedmoors, and then you get into your Psalms, and now you got PRC and some of your other 260, 264 level stuff. So, okay, I know my pressure range of exit pressure based on barrel length, and I know general my volume of gas is going to flow through the can. Okay, let's start there. So, how thick do the walls have to be? What's my internal pressure? It's called essentially hoop stress. My internal pressure on a round object. So we look at that kind of stuff and go, okay, well, I need this much volume. I need to flow this much gas. I need to do this and this and this. And so we kind of start baseline really just from a mathematical side. Is it a semi-auto application or is it a bolt gun? How much back pressure can you have? Are you chasing sound versus flash versus flow? And so they're all levers. And I always tell people this, like, you can't have, I want the quietest thing with all the flow and none of the flash. Like
Right.
there always is kind of a give and take on stuff. Now, the goal is to always optimize as much as possible so that you can get the best of most of those worlds. But what we try to do is a mathematical approach. We have a full test lab in our building. It's all soundproofed. We have a fully instrumented sled and lab essentially where we can shoot indoors and we gather all the data from recoil to kinematics to high-speed video, sound, gas box, flash, all the kind of stuff you would test at a military level. That's how we develop product because at the end of the day, I want to develop based on data, not how you felt that day.
Do you have a phantom
Because
camera at your?
I don't have a Phantom, but I have kind of the next level down high speed camera, so I can still shoot 30, 40,000 frames a second.
Wow.
Yeah, so we do a lot of development on with high speed on semi-auto guns with carrier speed, how much back pressure we're producing, and then bolt guns we look at from the kinematic side, and we look at flash, and we look at essentially visual signature as well. So it's all very data driven, though.
So, and the one thing I point from there, which I'm going to have to pull out next time I eat at Taco Bell, hoop stress. That's the scientific term. Gotcha. So, flow through. I've seen stuff about flow through suppressors. Can you talk about that? The pros, cons, ideas? What's
Yeah, so it's definitely when we got into we started out as building more bolt gun products, so precision hunting, precision rifle, not necessarily higher back pressure, but a little more restrictive product. Because for a bolt gun, you can essentially make it a little more restrictive because you don't have to worry about action, the reciprocating action. So when we got into kind of the semi-auto world and gas guns, we definitely wanted to be on the end of the spectrum that was higher flow based on the military and law enforcement customers that we had, because that was a very big requirement for them. We can't change how the gun operates by adding suppressors. So suppressors of the past were usually higher back pressure because they were chasing sound. We said, hey, let's see if we can get good sound, but also not overdrive the carrier speed by 30%, which there are a lot of suppressors that overdrive carrier speed over 30% that are on the market today. We essentially said, hey, here's the direction we're going to head. We're going to chase, flow as a priority, and then, go with sound and essentially flash after that. Okay. So that's kind of where it got us down the path. So like our baffle stack that's in our bolt gun suppressors is not completely 180 degrees different than our gas gun product, but it is noticeably different because I'm chasing different metrics. But most of our higher flow stuff, our semi-auto stuff, we're in single digit on carrier speed. We're usually sub 5%. So most of our product that we put out, it's one thing we really chase, is the goal is to put the suppressor on the gun and it do nothing but enhance the weapon system. It does not essentially give you detriment.
how much are you compromising in decibel reduction to have a flow state like that?
It really depends on the baffle design. I can say if I build two identical cans with both different versions of my baffle design, in like a 308 application, there's probably 5 to 6 dB difference. So not a ton, but noticeable.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what about
noticeable? So that's the balance, though.
What about POI shift, your point of impact shift? I know some people really like to, I think Surefire, that's their big thing. Hey, they're not that quiet, but their point of impact shift's going to be none. Minimal to none is what they claim.
Yeah, so that's one thing that we chase as well, is minimal impact to the gun, minimal impact to the barrel and their harmonics, and therefore that leads to minimal impact to the projectile. Now, we've had instances where we've had 0 POI shift. I will say the number one thing is barrel harmonics. That is what we've seen. Now, granted, there are a lot of suppressors that have really high back pressure that cause very large amounts of POI shift. I've seen 5 and 6 inches at 100 yards on a 308. So, we definitely chase for as low as possible, but we also chase more consistency. So what is the repeatability? Can you do that over and over and over again? And does your can walk in? So is your cold bore different from your second shot or your third shot or your fourth shot? So we actually chase that more than, essentially absolute POI shift, because there's so many other factors that change POI shift. So like a lot of our stuff is based around accuracy. How consistent is the suppressor on the gun day in and day out?
So you're making attachments as well, are you? Not just a suppressor, but ways for it to attach to the firearm and index and lock in nicely?
Yep. So we got a couple different things. I'm sure you've heard of hub, which is kind of that inch and 3/8 24 generic kind of thread. So we make some cans that take that. A lot of our really high precision stuff, we do our own proprietary muzzle system. So it's a very large taper surface, big coarse thread. So your engagement is based on a taper. not shoulder. So that is the most consistent way to do it. You'll see a lot of other precision-based companies, your Thunder Beasts and some of your other guys that are really chasing absolute repeatability and precision. Everything's based on taper engagement. So your alignment, every time you put the can on and off the gun, your effective change in how the suppressor interacts with the weapon system does not change.
I was doing a course a number of years ago in Alberta, and part of our business license is for design, development, modification, all the rest of prohibited devices, of which a suppressor is a prohibited device in Canada. So I thought, well, let's test this thing out, see how it can work. It was Rob Furlong's academy there. He's at one point held the record for the longest distance kill over in Afghanistan, and was passed by the Brits a couple years after that, and then Canada took it back. And recently, I think there's another, possibly in dispute, but someone who beat JTF2 on it. But anyways, I was running this thing, and I think it was a B&T, and had a lockable indexing system on it. It was running great for me, and what I didn't have proper was I didn't have the locking device properly secured on the firearm. Secure enough, so it started to unthread on me, and I ended up getting baffle strike. And that all I knew was that I'm shooting, and why aren't my rounds landing where I thought they would be landing? What's going on? And I realized, holy crow, like this looks tight, but the device wasn't tightened on there. So I tightened it all back up, but I still wasn't getting the accuracy that I was earlier in the week out of it. So I ended up running the rest of the course with the can off. And I got in there and I inspected, and the baffle strike wasn't crazy. It really wasn't that much. So either I was having a bad day and blaming it on the baffle strike, or a little bit of baffle strike can make a heck of a difference. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so most people think that there's a big, huge, ginormous hole, and that no, most of the time the clearances are a lot smaller than you would think. That's why suppressor alignment is so critical to maintain good sound reduction. So on average, if you're shooting a 30 cal projectile, most suppressors have less than a 3/8 hole through them. So if you do the math, that's 30 thousandths of an inch per side. So you don't need to move much, or you don't need to be a little bit off, or if you had a baffle strike and you bent one of the baffles in a little bit, it does not take a lot to cause an issue. And if you got one baffle that's really close to the projectile and then a bunch that aren't, you're going to have accuracy issues. It 100% can happen. And that's why we do pay a lot of attention to mounting systems. All of our hard use product is still a coarse thread with a taper, but it has a secondary latch that's a spring loaded latch. So when you tighten it on, it essentially keeps it from backing off, is one thing. And there's a bunch of other companies that have all kinds of secondary retention systems. And on gas operated guns, whether they're DI or piston, you have a lot of vibration in the weapon system. So you really do kind of need something else to kind of hold them on. And so we have the full gamut, from basic direct thread to precision taper mounting to taper plus secondary retention. And then we also do some integral rifles where the actual suppressor is built into the upper, built into the barrel itself.
So I played around a little bit with integral systems as well. And I mean, when you mentioned 22 before, 22 can be quiet, but that supersonic crack, with around 1,100 feet per second, depending on elevation, humidity, temperature, all those other things. I built one up. I'm shooting it. I'm like, man, this thing's not quiet. What's going on? I'm expecting quiet. And I pointed down into the ground and I pulled a trigger, and it's just super quiet. Pop, 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 pop. I'm like, oh, okay, so it's breaking the sound barrier. So I started porting on an integral, and I worked my way back on porting to be able to use high velocity ammunition. But when it comes out, it's not breaking that supersonic. I don't know if that's how people are supposed to do it, or if that's what people do. But
no. Funny story. That's how a lot of stuff is done. If the kind of the super famous MP5 SD, it's in every video game out there.
Yeah.
Well, how they achieve that is the barrel is ported. And so I had a product probably 8 years ago, I think, that I did with an AR manufacturer here in the U.S., where I did a integrally suppressed 9mm AR, and we had a ported barrel so that you could take 115 grain supersonic and drop it down to subsonic. And I see it a lot in 22s. You don't see it as much in centerfire rifles, just because you want as much velocity as possible. But your 9mm, 45, 22, all that kind of stuff like that, porting is a very good way to bleed off extra gas. So you essentially limit the pressure on time of the projectile, so you can keep it below that subsonic level.
So since I wasn't a mechanical engineer, and I'm playing around with like Z baffles, conical baffles, straight baffles. I think when I first started it was washers, trying this out, right? And what is more important, volume or baffle system for sound reduction?
That's interesting. For sound reduction alone, baffle is part of it, but also at the end of the day, volume will always help or always win. So hence why you can put a 2-liter Coke bottle in the end of a 22. It's not bad. It's actually pretty quiet for enough shots until you either blow out the end of it or something like that. But volume is it always helps because you have a fixed amount of volume coming out of your cartridge. So if you can always either supersede that or and then you get into the baffle design of how efficiently are you using that volume? Are you scavenging gas? Or are you moving gas into another chamber? We do a lot of multi-chamber technology. And so you can have a ton of volume with a bunch of fender washers and it'll be okay, but you're not effectively using the baffle design to essentially take advantage of the extra volume. And then you could also have a really good baffle design that if you don't have enough volume, you'll overdrive the baffle stack. So it is kind of a give and take. It's a game of balances. But a good baffle design with lots of volume will always perform well.
I think it was Steven Seagal on Deadly Ground, if I'm remembering right, back in the day. Put that little pop bottle on the end of his Beretta and... I think that really helped popularize the whole the pop bottle technique for getting things quiet.
Yep.
So you're in Atlanta, right?
Yep. Yeah. So we're just north of Atlanta. We're about 30 minutes outside the city, but effectively, yes, we're in Atlanta.
Okay. And you're in a Class 3 state, is it?
Yeah. So, not really a Class 3 state. So Georgia is suppressor friendly. As most kind of southeast states are, but we're still federally regulated by the ATF.
Okay. What sort of hoops do you have to jump through in your state? And then if you're selling in other states, what kind of obstacles and hoops do you have to look at? Like, I'd just like to get a little bit of a sense of what it looks like to be you and the stresses and pressures and bureaucracy that you have to deal with.
So, because we are federally regulated, we have two things. One is a federal firearms license. So we essentially allows us to get into the federal firearms kind of commerce. We are what's called an 07, so we are a manufacturer. And then to manufacture suppressors and NFA items, we have what's called an SOT, Special Occupational Tax, and we are an O2, which is a manufacturer of NFA products. So our licensing is 0702. So we can make machine guns, we can make suppressors, we can make silencers, short barrel rifles, all that kind of stuff. Essentially anything below ammunition and explosives. So I think explosives is type 10. Our limitation is, we don't sell direct to consumers. We have dealers, we have distributors, all that kind of stuff like that. But even down to the paperwork side is we cannot actually transfer, or we cannot sell directly to a person in another state. So when you look at the 4473 and the tax stamp and all that stuff currently, if we sold directly to an end user, we're not allowed to do that outside of our state, and that's a federal regulation. Actually, it's not a state thing. So we can only, if we sell direct, which we don't, but if we sold direct, we could only sell to Georgia residents in terms of transferring all the way to their ownership. So all the other states, it has to go through a dealer program.
Got it. And is this something you have to renew on an annual basis? Do people come in for inspections? I mean, in Canada,
Yep.
we've had controlled goods, and then we got our federal business license, and everyone's got their finger in, and different people looking at it. It used to be the suppressors. I was registered under controlled goods for them, and then they became a gray area, and they're like, we think the RCMP firearms program should be dealing with this, and now it's kind of outside of controlled goods. So what does it look like for you?
Yeah. So again, we're federally regulated. So we have every 3 years is our FFL renewal. That's our kind of our firearms manufacturing license, and then the special license on top of that, which is our SOT, is every year. So we file every single year to have that renewed, and then every 3 years for the FFL. We're supposed to get eligible for random inspection. So we've had ATF come through. They've done some training in our building as well from a large scale manufacturing standpoint. And so the local office has actually been in and done some training. We've done some sample work with the head office and stuff like that. So, it's kind of one of those, we're regulated by them. So we have to abide by them, but it's you keep your friends close, enemies closer, and your regulatory agencies closer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, because they can come in at any point in time and shut our business down, we take compliance very seriously. We've got several people on our staff that their full-time job is just maintaining our compliance between our bound books, between our licensing, how we file forms, how we keep up with the paperwork. Now, we're a fully digital system. So everything we do from the compliance side is fully digital. But it takes a lot of maintenance because of the volume we do. I mean, keep in mind, we're doing thousands and thousands of cans a month. So there's a lot of compliance, a lot of paperwork, a lot of serial numbers and stuff to keep up with, because we have to track it all the way through our process and then all the way out the door and who it goes to, and maintain those records and keep track of who it goes to.
Do you ever have instances where maybe one of the serial numbered suppressors ends up in a crime somewhere, and then you're asked to help and paper trail find this thing out?
So they're called skip trace checks.
Okay.
So we get, maybe a lot of them aren't because they're used in crimes. A lot of them because something will go missing down the road, or they get stolen out of the mail. We get suppressors stolen every single year. UPS, FedEx, Postal Service, all of them, they steal stuff out of the mail all the time.
Yep.
I would say, it's kind of one of those, like we have to keep an eye on it. We always pay attention to it, but it's it's something that we just have to deal with, and we have to keep track of all that stuff. But it happens all the time, and we get trace requests, and we have 48 hours to respond to them. So we have 48 hours from when ATF sends us an email going, I need to know when this was made, where did it get logged into your system, and where did it go out to? And we have 48 hours to provide that information, no matter what.
Wow. I know a Canadian fellow. He's got a firearms business, does manufacturing and repair and maintenance on guns, and he and his wife flew down to SHOT Show a number of years ago, and plane lands in Vegas, and intercom comes up, says, everyone just stay in your seats, right? Okay. Police come on board, they come up to his seat, and they take him and his wife and throw him in handcuffs, haul him off to a federal prison down at Vegas. And what's going on, right? And I find out about this because I drove by their business location, and their light was on, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to pop my head in there because I know this guy's supposed to be in Vegas right now. And sure enough, it was his wife was in there. She was obviously distraught, and she was going through paperwork, trying to find some stuff. And I said, what's going on? She's like, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure it out. Any help you can have, just let me know, right? Turns out, I guess he had purchased, I think it was 7 barrels for a handgun like 20 years prior. And in Canada, we don't serial number and itemize barrels. You don't track barrels. It's not a regulated item, but he'd purchased 7 from a wholesaler, and somebody of importance, some senator or some individual in Washington was shot in their backyard, and they say, it looks like the ballistics on this match a batch of, I think it was 300 barrels that were made between a certain period of time, these aftermarket barrels. And they had sent him out a request through the RCMP over here. The RCMP never forwarded that request onto him for information. And he was held in a federal prison and then transferred to another prison. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. They ended up holding on to him and said, we're not letting you go until we can find out this information. And his wife's like, we don't, like, what do you mean? This is like 20 years ago that we got this, these barrels. We don't track them. We don't know. Like, if you're going to sell a barrel, it's not a regulated item. Who gets it, right? And so that, to me, that was like, holy crow. Eventually, everything worked out. He's back and forth in the States, but pretty traumatic experience for the individual. And it strikes me that there is a heck of a lot of authority that's entrusted into the regulatory officials and the ATF in the United States. I don't know if they'd treat a citizen of the United States in a similar fashion, or if they felt like we got to hold on to him to get this information until, because if he's in Canada, we're stuck. But it sounds kind of crazy, kind of scary.
I would say that's probably a little bit of government overreach on that one.
It was,
and,
yes.
That's definitely the MO sometimes. I would say they're probably getting better. I think this administration definitely is probably going to chase some of that, but it's happened in the past, and it happened with other, other government agencies, your EPAs and your FDAs. Like, there's always going to be overreach in some way, shape, or form, and unfortunately, a lot of times good people pay for it, and it's a sad situation, and it is part of, I don't know, it's part of you're joining the club when you're getting into this high of regulation, that there is always that possibility. Not saying it's right. I'm not advocate. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, or it never happens. But it is part of getting into this, is you are entering into a much higher regulated space that they have a little more autonomy to be able to do stuff like that, and you're kind of guilty until proven innocent, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, that's definitely what happened there, and eventually proved innocent. And I mean, it really struck me, that one. So if Canada wants to start having the conversation, and this might not be something that we're having with our current government that was recently elected in, but maybe a government that's more sympathetic towards common sense, firearms legislation, licensing, all the rest. What advice would you have for a Canadian to try and start that conversation in Canada to have suppressors looked at as a health and safety device as they ought to be?
I think a lot of that is look at the statistics and try to make more of a common sense approach to it. Even from, your Canadian citizen side of, like, try to figure out why the government, again, there's probably not logic to it, but try to figure out why did they get regulated in the first place? Was it an incident? Was it something that triggered? Because clearly a lot of people had to vote for that in your government to make that happen. So what spurred them to do that? Why? What was their pain points? Why did all of a sudden become so much of a big deal that they go, no one should have these, but essentially military and law enforcement? Is that right? So essentially, military and law enforcement are the only ones. Yeah. So what happened? What changed in their mindset at that time to drive them to do that? Clearly, it was something big. So if you can understand that, you might can understand, okay, well, how do I counter that? Or how do I provide data or information or statistics? A lot of it's statistics driven. You look in the U.S., I think there's been 3 or 4 crimes in like 70 years with suppressors. It's like, come on.
Is that
like
it?
It's some astronomically small amount.
Wow.
And I think 2 of them that I know of, they were stolen one of them was stolen out of a police armory, actually out in California, and another one I think was stolen out of another guy's car. And so it's kind of one of those, like, by essentially law-abiding citizens, there may be one, but I can't think of any like actual federal felonious crimes that were committed with a suppressor that was essentially gathered or licensed legally. So if you just look at that statistic alone, you're like, if a bad guy has, or a felon has a legal suppressor, is that the suppressor's fault, or is that, are you essentially going to penalize every other civilian that follows all the laws because of someone that doesn't care about the law anyway? So, my advice would be just go at it with data, go at it with, common sense stuff. And like, look, the health and safety side of this thing is becoming, there are more and more studies based off on it. And there's more and more. And then you can look at the health side. How many insurance claims a year? This will be a good one for them. How many insurance claims a year are for shooting involved hearing damage? And how much does that cost the insurance agency? Or, y'all have national insurance, right?
Yeah, we've got insurance. Yeah, we got insurance.
Okay. So that data, I would be interested to know if that's public data, is if you could find out how many shooting related hearing loss claims are there.
That might be a tough one because hearing loss is a cumulative thing built over time, and you do it once, you can have damage, but is a person going to attribute that one event to
even if you did it just on one event, even if you did it on, hey, this one time, I was near something, or someone shot a gun off right by my head, or this and this, you're at a private shooting range. How many of those instances could you find? Because I can tell you on the VA side of thing, it is billions of dollars a year in the U.S. Billions. And then, could you find instances where law enforcement has had this issue? Now I know they're legal for them, but it's the same kind of thing of how, hearing aids are very expensive. Hearing therapy is very expensive. I would try that route and see if there's a health and safety side angle that you could put on it to go, look, this is not this big, bad, scary thing. We need them. Canada's a big, hunt. There's a lot of hunting.
Sure.
There's a lot of stuff, a lot of sports shooting.
Yep.
Why, then it becomes why can't we have them?
Why are you denying something that's clearly beneficial for health and safety based on what are you basing that denial on? And
Exactly.
That's just a good point. I find a lot of times these laws are enacted off of ignorance or emotion. People who are ignorant, they just don't understand. It's going to be just like on TV. It's going to be pew, pew, right? It's all you're going to hear. And or emotion. If someone's negatively affected by firearms, well, we better get rid of them all. Because that works, right? It worked with drugs, right? We'll just make drugs illegal, and then we'll never have a problem with drugs again, right? Clearly, that
see how that worked out,
right? I mean, the easiest place to get drugs is in the prisons. That's not really working for you, and people switch their modalities too. Like I get the emotional side behind firearms regulation. If someone's negatively affected by a firearm, it's a pretty traumatic event, and a firearm can cause catastrophic damage. But so can a U-Haul vehicle, a rental vehicle, your truck. And we're seeing that more and more, and it's getting driven into crowds. But I don't see the hue and cry to enact background checks, special taxes, security licensing for renting a large vehicle.
Nope.
So sometimes I look at it and I say, is attacking or is arguing an emotional response with logic, is that the best way? Well, if you're dealing with a logical person, maybe. If you're dealing with an emotional person, you might be kind of lost. And sometimes I look at it and I think, what if there's a way that you can allow them to save face? And them going to be whomever it is that's going to be responsible for making changes to the legislation. And I think the easiest way to allow to save face is to arm them with all of those stats and statistics. But even easier than that is to point them over to some other place that has already made the decision. So it's not us. We're not setting groundbreaking decisions here. We're just doing what these guys do because it seems to work for them. Are there places in the States that that you can think of that we could point over and say, look, it seems to be working for them. In fact, their health and safety, their hearing loss, their tinnitus, their hearing aid bills have gone down because of it, or anything like that?
I think it might be hard to find individual data sets on that. Again, I think a lot of it you could point to really the crime rate conducted with legally obtained suppressors. Like I said, there's crimes committed every day with illegal suppressors, no serial
Sure.
numbers, like that. So I think that those crime statistics are pretty readily available. Probably some Google search and you could get that. So, if they did it based on emotion from the crime standpoint, then go, okay, here's data from the U.S. that has 3.5 million suppressors, over 100 million firearms in circulation. Here's the crime statistics since 1934.
What do you think?
So,
Yeah.
no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, what do you think the right approach is with suppressors? Like, should they just be anyone can go and purchase them? Should there be background checks? I mean, there's going to be the my personal side. There's going to be the business side, and then there's going to be the forward-facing side. But obviously, there's going to have to be some logic that's applied because this is a situation of give and take. And just because you're 100% in the right doesn't necessarily allow the other side to feel right or to save face.
Yeah, that will be ultimately become the game of politics, and the get everything you want is they're completely unregistered. You pick them up like an inanimate object that you buy ammunition and targets.
Right.
That's completely one end of the spectrum. That's really what it should be because of what it is. But the reality of the situation is, okay, then what's the middle ground? Well, the middle ground is what I think is about to happen in the U.S. is, okay, then they're regulated like a firearm. So background check, you have to go through the same kind of stuff to essentially be able to purchase them. So therefore, your average quote-unquote criminal on the street can't have access to them easily. I think that's your middle road and probably one that you could pitch. Crawl, walk, run. I don't think they're going to go from 0 to 100 and go, oh, they're completely deregulated. They're not going to do that because then it makes them look too bad.
Right.
Again, to your point of saving face. So if the saving face is, okay, we want them, essentially regulated to X and then propose, again, whether it's be standard firearm, standard rifle, shotgun. I'm not so up on y'all's laws. So is a rifle and a shotgun treated the same as a semi-automatic, treated the same as a handgun?
Yes and no. So handguns in Canada are typically considered what we call restricted. Hey, you can own them, but there's some restrictions up until recently when they put I'm doing air brackets here, a freeze on the handguns, veritably prohibiting handguns, new purchase and sale, but people can still go and use them. But there's workarounds if it's going to be for work-related reasons, so they're getting ATC. So they call those restricted. Non-restricted was typically your hunting rifles and shotguns, but if it's too short or it looks too black or whatever, they're going to call it a restricted or prohibited. And then prohibited would be like, you can't have them, completely illegal, suppressors, full auto, short-barreled handguns that they would call Saturday Night Specials, and unless, of course, you owned them before a certain date, in which case you're grandfathered, and you can then have those certain things. So it's an absolute mess, and really what we need is a complete overhaul and complete rewrite of our Firearms Act. And I think a more favorable government here in Canada would have that on their docket because a lot of our current laws are completely untenable, and you'll see them quickly dropped in court. Somebody does something illegal and they have a firearm. The firearms ones are generally the first ones that get dropped off because they don't want the challenges on it. They don't want precedent set. And they're so vague and they're so obtuse that it weakens what we call our Crown prosecutor's case. So we've got a mixture there, but rifles and shotguns have generally been looked at as a more non-restricted. You have a license, you do a course, you don't have to have them registered to you. You can go out and purchase it as long as you can show your license.
Okay. So, yes, if you look back, your laws are probably a little archaic in terms of all the different, breakdowns. So maybe the first stab at that would be, okay, then let's move them to a quote unquote, not really unregulated, but under your licensing. So move them to your rifles and your shotguns and your stuff like that and go, look, this is an inanimate object that cannot fire a projectile. I understand you still want to regulate it, so let's move them to X. And that's a middle ground that, because at the end of the day, you're going to have bipartisan support. That's the only way you're going to have that change. Now, could you lob that in with more essentially evolution of your firearms laws? Possibly. And you do a couple iterations at one time, or every time stuff comes around, do you chip away at it a little bit more? Taking big, huge scoops, we've seen it in the U.S. It's really, really, really difficult to change people's mentality in a very, very large scope. So it's take a little bit here, take a little bit here, take a little bit here. Now, should you be able to go from 0 to 100? I completely agree. But the reality of the situation is you have to work within the confines of what is possible, because a little few steps here and there every time you do something will still get you to the end. It may take a little longer, but if you can make progress, then at the end of the day, the citizens are still benefiting.
Yeah, and I think that's been the same approach that I'll call the anti-gun people take as well. They want to take the big bite, but they will still be the camel in the tent. Oh, please, sir, it's so cold outside. Can I just put my hoof inside the tent? Just my hoof, right? And pretty soon you're sleeping outside the tent and the camel's in there nice and warm. And it works both ways. And I look at a number of years ago, we had a government in, I think it was Paul Martin, and he says, not going to do anything with your firearms. And all of a sudden he says, okay, we're going to ban all handguns. And that went over like a lead balloon. Fast forward a few years past that, and they took a very similar kind of approach, but instead of kind of banning them, they said, well, we're just going to put a freeze on them. Well, a freeze implies something can be thawed, but for all intents and purposes, they've took a great big chunk into it.
Okay, so how does the groundswell start? That's where you start. So how does that start in Canada?
Well, one thing that I see is the individuals, every individual, and something that I advocate for is the amount of agency that every individual has. Because in Canada, and I don't know what it's like in the States, but we've got gun organizations, and they do different things. We don't have one big overarching one, kind of like the NFA, the NRA that you guys have in the States that everybody knows about and hears about. But they're, by and large, I don't think they're nearly as effective as all of the individuals together doing the same work. So I think the groundswell starts at the individual level and educating people on how to approach their politicians and their MPs or MLAs and getting that conversation going in a respectful but targeted way. Still work with your organizations, but if history is going to be any indicator, if past performance is the best predictor of future performance, I think every individual in Canada has to start getting on a similar song sheet and pushing forward. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like as I was kind of asking of, can it be a groundswell from citizens, and does it move to where you have petitions that come out, when you have hundreds of thousands of signatures, and you have this constant kind of like, hey, like this is important to us. This is important to us. This is important to us. And again, I'm not as familiar with your government structure, but my guess is there's always a hierarchy path. So how do you start from the bottom? How do you move to the next level up? How do you start making it a part of the conversation? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's going to take to get all the way to your government structure. I'm sorry, I'm not. That's
okay.
Do you have a parliament? What's your basic government structure?
Don't ask me. I'll get on Google or Wikipedia, but it's not. It's not too dissimilar from what you guys have, right? You got.
Okay.
So
we have state representatives and we have senators and we have all that kind of stuff like that. So, how we've been doing a lot of stuff is like, hey, there'll be, websites that'll essentially allow you to, sign petitions or do emails, like email your senator, email your state representative, have them, bring this bill forward, have, Congress people in the states, it'll Congress or House of Representatives bring a bill forward, sponsor new legislation. So if it's similar to kind of the way we are, have someone sponsor a regulatory adaptation, make it a bill or do something like that. But start it getting, whether it gets knocked out or not, at least it becomes, someone's asking about this. People are asking about this. And it's going to be that continued perseverance, really, of the elected officials to listen to their constituents. They have to listen to their people, but the people also have to speak up. They also have to say, hey, this is important to us. We want this. Hey, this is important to us. We want this. So when I go back to the groundswell, when an elected official feels pressure, they're gonna want to listen. So if there's enough provinces that are starting to put pressure, it's going to become a conversational topic. And I think at the end of the day, like you said, it's education, but it's also you have to start the conversation somewhere.
Where do you see the future of suppressors in the United States and abroad?
I really think, and again, maybe it's me personally, I think you're going to see a lot more integrally based weapon systems. I think as suppressors become more and more commonplace, there's a lot of benefits to designing a weapon system around being suppressed from day one. A lot of the testing and R&D and stuff we do is to build a product that can fit on anything. So we have a wide operational range. Well, like our integral 5.5, so we have an integral 5.56 upper. That I tuned the gas system, I tuned the port, I tuned everything about that gun and upper because it's going to be suppressed all the time. So there's a lot of, I would say, meat on the bone to building a purpose-designed system that allows you to actually get so much more performance out of the same size because you can control all these variables. And so I see a lot of that stuff moving forward. And we've done very well in the law enforcement community with our integrals. We have many agents. We have hundreds and hundreds, knocking on thousands of integral weapon systems out there because from a patrolman aspect, most starting police, I'd say maybe 50% or more have never fired a gun before they went to academy.
Sure.
So from the law enforcement aspect, being able to go, hey, this is not a big, huge, loud bang for someone that knows no weapons handling skill or has no weapon handling skills. An integrally suppressed rifle is the easy button. It's the easiest thing for them to train because they don't have all the concussion. They don't have we have recoil reduction, all the benefits of shooting suppressed in a turnkey system that all you do is put a mag in it and go. Right. So we've had a lot of really good luck. So I see a lot of that stuff, and there's so little maintenance. You just throw it in your car. You don't have to worry about the QD system coming loose or any of this other stuff. So on the military and law enforcement side, I really see integrals starting to do a lot. Like our 50 cal, our M2 is an integral. It's built into the barrel, and it's made to last as long as the barrel because you're going to change. It's a consumable. You're going to change it out anyway. So I think hunting rifles, you're going to see a lot of that stuff. But if this legislation patches in the U.S., what you're going to see is you're going to see more of a bell curve in product. In the ARs, there's $300 ARs and there's $3,000 and $10,000 ARs. Well, both of them still sell. They have different feature sets. I think you'll see suppressors do a lot of that, where you may have your budget can that, like, hey, buyer beware. It's a $200 suppressor. Like you get what you get, and then you may have, hey, this is a $2,000. Like our 50 cal bolt gun suppressor is a $3,000 suppressor. But it's big, it's huge, it's all titanium, weighs nothing, there's a lot of engineering in it, does very, very well. But I think you're going to see a larger proliferation of technology as the suppressor ownership grows, because there's just going to be more want and need for more things. So you're just going to see more and more and more technology dumped into the industry to make something for everyone.
Interesting. So, okay, your 50 cal is going to be burning a little faster through a barrel, but what about your 223s? Are you going to be burning the suppressor out faster than you would your barrel, or?
No, we still, our integrals will still burn barrels out faster than the suppressor. Now,
Really?
granted, that's because we overbuild the suppressor though. That's us as a company. Like we
Sure.
overbuild it. Has an all Inconel core. We overbuild it. I always want the barrel or something else besides the suppressor to fail first. And so a lot of that's due to our testing, and a lot of it due to stuff like that. Now, if you look at the hunting world, okay, yeah, you know, if you're shooting 300 Norma or something like that, or say 6 Creedmoor, your barrel's done in 1,200 rounds.
Right.
Okay, so what you do is you design the system so that you still can remove the suppressor and change it out and put it on a different barrel, but it still maybe you sleeve the whole barrel. Like there's a bunch of different designs you could do that'll still allow you to change out the suppressor when you change out the barrel, or you make it so cheap and consumable that you can change it out when you change the barrel out. There's multiple different business models that you could do with that.
Yeah, it's really, aside from all the government regulation, it is kind of a sweet business model to be in because it is a consumable, and it's something that and you build it right. And people, it's kind of like the coffee businesses and why there's so many of them, because people keep needing coffee, they keep coming back, and there's always different colors, different configurations, and then of course end of lifespan when they've got to get another one. The only real downside would be that club that you spoke about joining when you get into the high oversight and regulation required to actually design and build these things.
Yeah. So there is a barrier of entry. Now, if the regulation, essentially, if the regulation on the object itself changes, our regulation as a manufacturer technically could change. Now, we still like having machine guns, so we're probably going to keep our higher regulation, but our theoretical exposure is exponentially reduced, because then we're only going to be regulated by SBRs or machine guns or, a couple hundred items versus hundreds of thousands of items of which we've built over the years. So yes, it would allow the barrier of entry to be lower to get into the game. But it's still a quote unquote regulated game because it's still a firearm.
Sure. I mean, for the end user, that barrier to entry being lowered is going to create more competitive options, more people coming out. From a business standpoint, it's going to be that double-edged sword of now more people can purchase with less headache, but now you've got no more players in the game coming into it. Is that part of the business model? Is that concern?
It's not as really a concern, and part of our business model is OEM. So we do a lot of OEM work for other people. So we build a lot of branded product. You can go into a lot of stores and you're probably buying something that we made. That's kind of the whole back end of our business model. So we've a little statistic. So we just surpassed 380,000 suppressors in the last 5.5 years. It's a lot of cans.
That's a lot of
because
that's impressive.
That's a lot of cans.
Yeah.
So we've built a lot of product, and that's kind of where our business model has evolved over the years is, yes, we have a KGM brand, we have a very niche product, but we build product for a lot of other big brands. So our manufacturing capacity is exponentially higher than we are as a brand. And to support that is, we have multiple other brands. We build a lot of stuff for other people. We do fulfillment. We do packaging. We do full turnkey. Like we have several customers that never touch their product. We do all the way from building, sourcing parts, assembly, packaging, managing their warehouse on all of their inventory, and fulfilling to their dealer. They never touch the product.
So here's a loaded question. If you were to have a non-resident come and want to take a tour of the factory, is that permissible under your business regulations? The reason I ask is because a friend of mine, she works for Norma, which isn't too terribly far away from you, and planning to go down there and visit. And I'd be thrilled to see kind of what you guys are all about.
Yep. So, covered under, because we are an ITAR regulated, essentially, a business, there just would be certain things that I couldn't show you, certain manufacturing processes or essentially know-how. You know, it's kind of one of those, you just, I don't want to violate ITAR, but there's just certain parts of the building or there's certain things I couldn't show you. For the most part, I can give you a pretty overarching tour of, how our facility's laid out, the machines, some of the things we do. We do some other contract manufacturing. I mean, we have a whole medical division too. Like we have a whole separate thing that's in medical. So, yes, I could do that as well.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that we should be talking about?
I don't think so. I said it's been a pleasure to hop on, and we do have some product in Canada. Rampart was one of our distributors that brought some stuff up. So there's some agencies up there. I know we had talked to some of the GFTF2 guys. I think RCMP has a couple of our cans for testing. So I know suppressors are not as big a thing in Canada, but I do see the law enforcement military side following with the U.S. They've come down to several of the military shoots that we have throughout the U.S. And the Canadians are always there. So RCMP is always there, JTF2 is always there. So they are very much following along with what a lot of U.S. SOCOM, big Army, big Marine Corps, all your SF groups. The Canadians are also following, trying to make sure that they keep up with what U.S. is doing, what Europe's doing, Five Eyes, all that kind of stuff like that.
Beautiful. Well, Kyle, it was a lot of fun. It was educational, and I want to thank you for being on the Silvercore Podcast.
I appreciate you having me, and again, happy to hop on anytime if you've got questions or discussion on the politics. I'm not a huge political guy, but I try to keep up with it as it relates to myself and the industry and stuff like that. So again, always happy to on. If you're down in the States and you get near us, you are always welcome to come by the facility. We have a range in the building, so if anything we can shoot some fun stuff.
Oh, it sounds amazing. And I'm going to make sure we got links in the description so people can find you on social. Yep. They can find your website. And if they needed to follow up, they know where to go. Kyle, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.